Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome in again to another edition of Rath's Learning Curve. I'm your host, Rath, and hit me up on Twitter at Fantasy Rath. And staying in the college fantasy football arena, and now we're going to talk about the differences between Fanduel and DraftKings, some basic strategy, how you want to play both sites, because to be quite honest with you, they are very, very different. Scoring systems are different, rosters are different, salaries are different, it's everything in general. So let's start off. Let's go with FanDuel. You got one quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, and a tight end. So similar to their NFL product. Obviously, no kicker, no defense. So here's what you do. Typically, much like you do with starting pitching in baseball, because it's only one, I'm spending up and I want the biggest stud possible at the quarterback position. And I typically am going to want a guy like Trevin Boykin who's going to run and pass and go wild. So I want like 300 yards air, 100 yards on the ground. I want 5 touchdowns. I want pinball scores, Tecmo Bowl, whatever you want to call it. I'm loading up at the quarterback position. Again, I got one. I can't blow it, so I got to hit it. Also, guys, like Brandon Doughty from Western Kentucky, guys like that who have a shot at going 500, 600 yards in the air, 5, 6 touchdowns. So you can top shelf QB all the way on FanDuel. Now, 2 running backs. Typically, what I'm going to do here is I'm looking at a couple different strategies, and we're talking about cash games here. We're not really getting into tournaments yet. So I want stud running back with Primo. I want a guy who's going to give me 25, 30 carries, 200 yards, 150 yards, a couple touchdowns, guaranteed bank, right? So I'm spending top shelf on at least one running back. And second, just depending on how the slate works, I'm probably going to go mid-tier with a guy that's just got a ridiculous matchup that he's going against a defense that's one of the worst in college football against the run. It's a very high-scoring game, and he's just going to get a lot of opportunities to get the ball. Now, the other strategy is if I can save a little bit of money on that second running back and I get a guy who's starting and taking a spot of a stud running back who's out because of injury or suspension, then I'm going to want to go that direction. Perfect example last year, Nick Chubb from Georgia. Perfect opportunity where you're going to run a guy out there like Amir Abdullah or James Conner and pair him with a Nick Chubb, get some salary relief, spend up at quarterback and a little bit more at the wide receiver. 3 wide receivers, half-point PPR. Again, all about touchdowns, all about yardage. Typically, I'm looking at yardage here, and I want guys that can give me 7, 8, 9 catches a game. I want volume. I want quarterbacks that go to one wide receiver for the most part. I don't want offenses to spread the ball around. So, I want one stud typically from one of these big high-powered offenses, but I want to make sure that it's a go-to guy. Then I'm looking at just guys who are mispriced in terms of the matchup is one against one of the worst passing defenses with a very high total. And maybe it's a number 2 wide receiver that's going to get more play if the game turns into a blowout where the number 1 maybe comes off the field and the number 2 becomes more of a priority. The other situation I'm looking at is early on in the season, there's going to be transfers. There's going to be guys stepping up in a starting position. So you're going to find value a lot of times at the wide receiver position, especially when you're starting 3. So you have to find value at wide receiver. I'm typically looking for value at least 2 of my 3 wide receiver spots. I want 1 stud and 2 value plays. And again, at tight end, I'm punting. I'm not spending up. I'm looking for an opportune matchup where I feel like it's a really high total and give me 4 or 5 catches, 50 yards, and maybe an outside shot at a touchdown. But again, I'm not spending up on tight end. I'm punting because the likelihood of a big game is so rare for a tight end that just doesn't pay to spend up. Spend up at quarterback, spend up at one of your stud running backs and one of your stud wide receivers. That's strategy on FanDuel. Moving over to DraftKings, it's a different story. 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex. I will tell you right now, 99.9% of the time, I'm going to play a running back at flex on DraftKings, which is different than the NFL. Here's why. I'm going to get a lot more opportunity to get a 100-yard rusher in college football than I'm going to do in college on the wide receiver spot. So it's all about the 3-yard bonus. 1 point PPR on DraftKings, 300-yard passing, you get a 3-point bonus. 100 yards rushing or receiving, you get a 3-point bonus as well. Again, it's a lot easier for me to find a 100-yard running back than it is a 100-yard wide receiver because teams spread the ball around so much in college that 100-yard wide receivers are actually tougher to find than 100-yard running backs. So, again, there's some offenses that do run the ball heavy. Those are the guys that are going to get you the 100 yards. Those are the guys you want to focus on. There's always value at the running back position because a lot of times these teams just interchange running backs, whether it's injury, whether it's suspension, whether it's a guy not playing well and there's a top recruit that's backing up. I'm telling you right now, we are going to be just finding value all over the place at the running back position on DraftKings this year for college fantasy football. There's no reason to spend up at that second RB or flex. Now, I am going to spend up at one of my RBs for sure. I want to lock in points. I want to get that floor. Now, at the quarterback position, I'm definitely looking for a stud, much like Fanduel, but then I'm looking for value. I'm looking for a guy who's inheriting a starting role that might be minimum salary. Luke Falk, Josh Dodds. There was a lot of guys last year that you could go get at very low salaries that had a lot of upside. So looking for value at that second quarterback position. Don't want to, we got to lock in that number one. A lot of times it's very hard to spend $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 on a quarterback because you've got to hit. You've got to get 40 points out of these guys. Otherwise, it's a bust. So that's why I'm looking at, spending like 10 and maybe spending 6 or spending 10 and 7 or 10 and 9 and 8, whatever the situation is. But, typically what I'm trying for is I want hybrid quarterback first. I want the running and the receiving. I want the running and the passing. I want all the opportunities for touchdowns and yardage. Then I'm looking at the guys that throw 50, 60 times a game. That's just how it is. That's what we're looking for. So that's a quarterback strategy. Now, at the wide receiver position, again, with the 100-yard bonus and the 1-point PPR, I'm trying to find guys that I'm okay going after wide receivers in offenses where the ball is spread around a little bit because I'm mostly looking at trying to get just sheer volume. I want 7, 8, 9 catches. I want to get 1 point. I'm not as worried about the 3-point bonus for the 100 yards for receiving in college fantasy football, again, because I'm going to get it hopefully at the quarterback position twice, and I'm going to get it at the running back position hopefully 2 times or maybe even 3 times. So I'm not as worried about it at the wide receiver spot. A couple different ways you can go about doing it. You can go kind of, across the board, spend 6,000, 7,000 on each wide receiver. I find that usually doesn't work unless I get a situation where a guy can really, really break out, like Josh Doctson last year from TCU, who was very underpriced and broke out, became a top player. I'm really going to probably spend up at the wide receiver position on at least one. I want one mid-tier guy, and then I want one flyer. Maybe it's a number 3 wide receiver in a ridiculous matchup where maybe they're going to be more focused on the 1 than the 2, and the number 3 guy is going to get some play. So that's how I'm looking at it from the wide receiver position. Tight end, I'm looking to punt. Same strategy as FanDuel, but I'm more focused on the receptions because I want 1 point per reception. So I'm just looking at guys who get a lot of targets, get a lot of looks, and I'm probably looking at some of those smaller school guys that are more of a focal point of the offense. Now, sometimes they come a little bit more expensive. I'm okay spending a little bit more money on DraftKings at tight end because of 1 point per reception, but with a half-point PPR, it makes no sense on FanDuel to spend up for tight end. That's your comparison for DraftKings versus FanDuel, college fantasy football for 2015. Can't wait for these salaries to go live. We can start digging in, find some plays for you. That's how you want to play both sites this year. Check back again for another Rath Learning Curve video. We talk about NFL, college fantasy football, everything you need to know with DFS for 2015. Thanks again.